There are a ton of reasons to love this film. It's got some of the best action sequences of any movie in the canon. It deeply develops Steve's character and his relationship with Nick Fury, Bucky, and Natasha.
What about the nurse that lives across the hall from you? She seems kind of nice.
Secure the engine room, then find me a date.
I'm multitasking.
It establishes a great new relationship with Sam Wilson.
Don't say it. Don't you say it.
Left.
Come on!
And its plot is filled with complex and exciting mysteries to unravel. The personal stakes for Captain America are really high.
You're my friend. You're my mission.
You're my mission!
Then finish it. Because I'm with you to the end of the line.
But more than all of that, the film is a debate between two fundamentally opposing worldviews, pitting the value of individual freedom against the goal of national security. Multiple scenes throughout the movie reinforce these ideas, but it begins in an elevator with Nick Fury telling Steve Rogers a story.
My granddad worked in a nice building, got good tips. He'd walk home every night, a roll of one stuffed in his lunch bag. He'd say hi, people would say hi back. Time went on, neighborhood got rougher. Granddad got to gripping that lunch bag a little tighter. Every week some punk would say, "What's in the bag?"
What would he do?
He'd show him. Bunch of crumpled ones and a loaded .22 Magnum. Granddad loved people, but he didn't trust them very much. Yeah, I know. They're a little bit bigger than a .22.
This is not only an incredible cinematic set piece that establishes the terms of the final confrontation, it's also the central intellectual argument for the whole film. S.H.I.E.L.D. is building new helicarriers that can not only hover above the planet indefinitely, but which can also remotely target individuals with long-range guns based on their DNA. These weapons would be a source of concentrated, deadly power unparalleled in human history. Nick Fury would have us believe this is a good thing.
We're gonna neutralize a lot of threats before they even happen.
Thought the punishment usually came after the crime.
We can't afford to wait that long.
Who's we?
Take note of that line. It's incredibly insightful, but we'll get back to that later. We're about to get to the core issue at hand.
After New York, I convinced the World Security Council we needed a quantum surge in threat analysis. For once, we're way ahead of the curve.
By holding a gun to everyone on Earth and calling it protection.
You know, I read those SSR files. Greatest Generation? You guys did some nasty stuff.
Yeah. We compromised, sometimes in ways that made us not sleep so well. But we did it so that people could be free. This isn't freedom. This is fear.
This isn't freedom. Even though a lot of the plot of Captain America: Winter Soldier revolves around the mystery of a superhuman assassin and Hydra's infiltration inside S.H.I.E.L.D., that line is the absolute core of what matters in this movie. The question it asks of Steve, and of all of us, is this: is the promise of a perfectly secure world worth the price of our individual rights? At the end of the film, World Security Council Secretary Alexander Pierce, played masterfully by Robert Redford, is even more direct.
Let me ask you a question. What if Pakistan marched into Mumbai tomorrow, and you knew that they were going to drag your daughters into a soccer stadium for execution, and you could just stop it with a flick of the switch? Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you all?
A lot of people would struggle with an answer, but before you give me yours, let me turn that question around. Imagine that it's not you with the power to decide who lives or dies. In fact, imagine that this power will never be in your hands. Is there anyone on Earth to whom you would entrust a switch that allows them to target and kill individuals all over the world at their sole discretion? Should you trust any group of people with that power? I don't. But let's get back to Steve.
Who's we?
Nick Fury uses the term to mean S.H.I.E.L.D., But as the movie reveals, S.H.I.E.L.D. has already been corrupted by Hydra, and they're planning to use the power of the helicarriers to target and kill millions of innocent people.
I can bring order to the lives of 7 billion people by sacrificing 20 million. It's the next step, Nick. You have the courage to take it.
And let's not forget that in this universe, the World Security Council already fired a nuclear weapon at New York City. But more importantly, it's worth really thinking about what "we" actually means in terms of making decisions. This is always one of the more controversial points I make on this series, but the fact of the matter is, groups of people don't make decisions. They can't. They have no brains or agency of their own. This observation is at the heart of a branch of economics called public choice theory, which looks at the way incentives and individual self-interest affects political decision-making. While groups help us easily categorize communities of people who share one trait or another, we should never forget that they are comprised of individuals with their own values and goals. They're the ones who are actually making decisions. Even if we're talking about democracy, a majority of voters can only share their general preferences by electing individual politicians to make decisions on their behalf. Those people are then granted tremendous power over what happens to millions of other citizens, including all those who didn't vote for them and don't share their values and ideas.
I'm sorry, did I just mishear you, or did you agree with me?
Oh, I want to take it back.
Politicians are just people who have their own values and who respond to incentives just the same as anyone else. The big difference is that they face far fewer direct consequences for their actions, and the cost of their decisions is paid for by other people. When those same politicians can imprison or physically harm anyone who refuses to do what they say, it's easy to see why power is so often abused. Now, in theory, if enough people are unhappy with their representatives' choices, they can hold another election and try again. But at the end of the day, no decision is made by a collective hive mind.
Who's we?
The point is, when Nick Fury says "we," he's using a shorthand that obscures reality. He actually means that he and his friends get to play God with their new flying death machines. Meanwhile, people like Captain America, who don't agree that they should have that power to begin with, don't get a say. And who knows, maybe Nick Fury would have been more trustworthy with that kind of power, but he wasn't in control of it for very long. That's predictable, and we need to keep it in mind whenever someone demands that we give them tons of power in exchange for security. We've seen this kind of logic play out in the real world more times than I can count. The real question is, why did we allow this? When people feel fear, they're much more willing to accept anything that makes the world seem a little safer. This happens because anxiety actually disrupts the normal functions of the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that helps us make decisions and solve problems. When people are stressed, it's much easier to convince them to accept policies without thinking critically. I'm concerned that's happening again right now. In the wake of a viral pandemic, we've seen an explosion of support for expanding government power. It's easy to understand why people are afraid, but if the answer is restricting individual liberty all over the world on the hope that politicians will use that power for good, the cure could do far more harm than the disease. Politicians have an incentive to exploit fear to gain more power. And just like in Captain America: Winter Soldier, that power won't always be in the hands of people with good intentions or the right ideas. I'm not going to say that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, but whenever life forces us to deal with danger and anxiety, we need to be careful not to let that drive us to overreact and abandon our most important principles. It's possible to counteract this effect by slowing down, calming ourselves, and waiting to make important decisions until after our strongest emotional reactions subside. One of the things that makes Steve Rogers such a great character for the MCU is that he's always been the moral bedrock for everyone around him. His principles and courage allow him to stand up to those who would trade freedom for the false promise of security.
S.H.I.E.L.D., Hydra. It all goes.
Looks like you're giving the orders now, Captain.
Intuitively, it's easy to think that totalitarianism performs better in a crisis. Dictators can mobilize more resources. They're all too happy to use brutality to force people to do what they want, and citizens who live in fear of their rulers are more compliant. But as confident as political leaders often want to appear, nobody actually knows what solutions are going to work best. One size doesn't actually fit all. Freedom doesn't just make us more independent. It also makes us the most flexible and agile when those traits are the most needed. It allows us to experiment with different ways of helping each other and to communicate what we've learned with everyone else. It allows entrepreneurs to quickly adapt and bring goods and services to people who need them, instead of waiting for slow-moving bureaucracies to grant their approval. Free societies are also considerably wealthier, which means that they have way more ability to cushion people from the worst consequences of a disaster. Throughout history, people who have traded their freedom for promises of security have found that they wind up with neither. The intellectual conflict at the heart of Captain America: Winter Soldier is just as relevant today as it has ever been. We're constantly bombarded with alarming messages from the news and social media. Terrorism, immigration, drug cartels and gangs, pandemic disease, GMOs, student loan debt. There's always something to be afraid of, and there's always someone willing to sell us a sense of security in exchange for more power. But while that sense of security is usually an illusion, the cost of giving up our freedom is not. We need to calm ourselves and confront our fear, instead of allowing it to hijack our ability to reason and lead us to make bad decisions that we can't take back.
The price of freedom is high. It always has been. And it's a price I'm willing to pay. And if I'm the only one, then so be it. But I'm willing to bet I'm not.
I'm with Captain Rogers. Are you?